Okay, everybody should have their quiz back. Take a look and make sure you're looking at version B. It should say version B on the top. If you've got version A, you want the other video. And remember, you've got an assignment to do while you're checking these. You've got a piece of paper where you're going to write down for each problem a reminder. If you missed it, you're going to remind yourself what to do so you don't miss it the same way again. Make a new mistake next time. Don't make the same mistake. Now, if you got it right, just write down, I got this. But if you got it wrong, whatever it is, maybe it's a reminder to check for a greatest common factor. Maybe it's a reminder of signs. Maybe it's, maybe it's something else. Now, maybe you missed it because you didn't get to it. So maybe the reminder is to skip problems you're having trouble with so you can get to it. But definitely need to have these written down. This is an assignment. This will be a super easy grade. Just make sure you're doing it. Now let's get on with it. Problem number 1. Factor the function f of x equals x squared plus 8x plus 12 completely. Now that word completely suggests that maybe we've got a greatest common factor, but we don't. We can tell looking at it, that one's just got an x squared at the beginning, and there's no x on the last one, so we definitely don't have a greatest common factor. So that means with 3 terms, we just go ahead and split the middle term. So that's going to give us something x squared plus blank x plus blank x plus 12. We need to fill in those things in the blank, so we need our clues. What are our hints? Well, first of all, p times q equals something. It equals the first number times the last number. So that is 1 times 12, which is 12. But we need another clue, but first that tells us a lot of stuff. For instance, if it multiplies to be 12, there's only 3 possibilities for pairs. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So our other clue will tell us which one we needed. And our other clue is what they add to be, p plus q, and that always equals the middle number. So p plus q is going to equal 8. If you add up these, there's only one pair that's going to add up to be 8. That is 2 and 6. So those are the 2 numbers we're going to put in our blanks there, 2 and 6. So now we've got something we can group. If we group the first 2, what can I pull out of that? Well, x squared and 2x, they have an x in common. Divide off an x, that takes one of the x's away from both of those, still leaves me with x plus 2. The second pair, that's a 6x and a 12. It's always plus whatever we get from the second pair. What goes into both of those? Well, 6 goes into both of those. Divide off a 6, you're left with x plus 2. We know this is going well if those parentheses are the same, and here they are. So we only need that x plus 2 once. What goes in our other parentheses? Well, that says leftover stuff, the stuff we pulled out earlier, the x and the 6, so x plus 6. And that's it. That's our answer. X plus 2 times x plus 6. Now, before we go too far, notice that 2 and 6 in our answer. We've seen those before. We've seen them right over here. They were our p and q. When do we always get p and q in our parentheses? Well, not always. Only in a very specific case do we get our p and q both in the parentheses with the x, and that's when our leading coefficient is 1. When the number in front of the x squared is 1, that's the only time you're going to get your p and q right in there. Otherwise, at least one of those numbers will change in the process of factoring. But what that means for us is anytime that we see there's no number in front of x squared, if we can find p and q, we can throw them right in parentheses with x, because we need the x times x to equal x squared. That p and q will always end up there. That can maybe save us a step or two in the process of factoring. Although if you're halfway through a problem before you think about that, it might be faster just to keep going the way that we've already done it. But you'll see this come up fairly frequently, especially as we move on to other skills that just need a little bit of factoring with them. You'll see a leading coefficient of 1, so that it'll factor much faster. All you've got to do is find the P and Q, toss them in the parentheses. Our second problem does not have a 1 in front of our x squared, at least not to start with. Maybe there's a greatest common factor because this one does say completely. It doesn't take long to look at it and say no greatest common factor on this one either. 2x squared, there's no x's in the last term, and the middle term's not even, so there's nothing they have in common. So again, 3 terms, we can get right to factoring it. By the way, don't let this, where it talks about a function or this g of x, don't let any of that bother you. It's just the context. We see polynomials show up in context a lot for our factoring. It's just the polynomial part we're focusing on. So we can split that middle term. 2x squared plus blank x minus 12. So what are my clues? Well, I need p times q to equal something. Those blanks, of course, are p and q. Well, they're going to multiply to be the first number times the last number, so 2 times negative 12. That means they'll multiply to be negative 24. The fact that they multiply to be negative tells me that one is positive and one is negative. I can't multiply 2 positive numbers or 2 negative numbers and get a negative. It's got to be one of each. So we know that much already just looking at that they multiply to be negative 24. Also, the 24 lets us narrow this down into some pairs. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. It's got to be one of those pairs. Which one? Well, we need to know what P and Q add to be so we can be sure of that. Well, P plus Q is going to be negative 5. Well, that already tells me something just knowing that it's negative, because if I've got a positive number and a negative number and it's going to add to be negative, well, that means the negative number was the bigger number of the two. Because when you add a positive and a negative, you always get the sign of the bigger number. So why don't we turn all these bigger numbers from those pairs into negatives and see which ones add up to be the negative 5 we need. Well, that's going to be 3 and negative 8. So that's my P and Q. I usually put the negative number first, so we'll call it negative 8 and 3. Now I can group it and look for GCF in each pair. This first pair, they're both even and they both have an x, so we're going to pull out a 2x. What does that leave me with? If I pull out the 2 and one of the x's from the beginning, that leaves me with x. Negative 8x divided by 2x is going to be negative 4. Second pair, we add that on. Well, 3 goes into both those numbers, so we'll pull out a 3. That leaves us with also x minus 4. We know this is going well if those are the same, so I only need that parentheses once. I do need a second set of parentheses. What goes in that? The stuff that we didn't pull out just now. That's the 2x and the 3. It's worth a quick double check. Make sure you don't have a greatest common factor in either one of these parentheses. If we did, we could pull it out at the end instead of the beginning. We did check for it at the beginning, so I'm pretty sure we don't, and we definitely don't. So this is our answer. So let's move on to number 3. All right, this one says factor the function completely. There's that word completely again. So whenever you see that, you want to look for a greatest common factor, and this one does have a greatest common factor. Our greatest common factor is going to be, well, 3 goes into all of those. So if we pull out a 3, we can figure out what's left by dividing each of those by 3. It's going to give us x squared minus 4x plus 8. And that's still a trinomial, so we still attack it the same way that we have been. We want to try to split the middle term. We need two numbers that multiply to be the first number times the last number. 1 times 8 is 8. And they're going to add to be the middle number, which is -4. So, if they multiply to be positive, that means we're dealing with two of the same sign. They add to be negative means they're both negative. So what numbers could they be? What multiplies to be 8? Well, it would be -1 and -8, and -2 and -4. And that's it. That's all the things that multiply to be 8. And here's where it gets a little tricky. Or not. Depends on how well you wrap your head around this concept. But if you add these together to see which one's the right pair, -1 plus -8, that's -9. -2 plus -4, that's -6. And I'm out of things to try. But I haven't gotten my -4 that I'm looking for. So what does that mean? Well, that means there's no acceptable P and Q. Nothing is going to work. I can't split my middle term. Which means that x squared minus 4x plus 8 is just going to be my answer. If you can't find an acceptable P and Q, then it's not going to factor. But that doesn't mean that's my whole answer, because we're forgetting something. I did factor something, and that was that 3. I pulled out the greatest common factor. That's part of my answer. Don't forget that. So this wasn't a prime problem, because we did have something that factored. It didn't factor the way we expected it to, but if there's any factoring at all, then it's not prime. Sometimes that's the hardest part of a factoring problem, is knowing when to stop factoring, knowing when you're done, you've tried everything that can be tried, and it's not going anywhere. So, yeah, this last one came out a little bit weird, but sometimes factoring problems come out that way, and we need to be prepared to deal with that as much as anything. Watch for that to show up on problems other times. We've definitely seen problems that did this, but most of the time those were just factor out the GCF problem. All right, so make sure that you have given me your sentences, just telling me what it is you need to do. Mostly you're telling you what it is you need to do so you don't make the same mistake. For this last one, it might have even been trust your answer. And when you're done with that, put it in the basket and make sure you're ready for the next one of these mini quizzes, which we're going to have on Friday.